passion to beat somebody, we're passionate to beat everybody.
My expectation is we go out and dominate and create a nightmare and make people never want to play you again.
If you are a fan of another team and your coach is not out there doing everything that Kirby Smart is doing right now, you are already losing. You feel however you want to feel about that.
Nowhere to run and nowhere to hide for 4 quarters. They got to see us in our house for 4 quarters. They got to look us in the eye for 4. This is about us and our family and our house. This is about us. This is our mentality. We ain't backing down. We ain't running. Set a tone, send a message. This is our house. Physical toughness wins in football now. And if you in this room, you got it. If you come in here, you better believe in it. Because this physical toughness, it's what makes the difference. Elite focus. That's all I'm doing to the guy across from me. I'm fixing to whip his ass. Not in my box, not today. It's about us. It's about our family. We attack. You take that helmet and you strike them. And you strike them and you strike them. That's how you get respect. Physically, I want to break them.
And we are back for day 3 of our coverage of SEC Media Days. Have you been dialed in all day? Don't worry about it. That's why we're here. I've got you covered. Everything that happened in Atlanta today from the podium, I've got experts from across the conference who are going to come in here and lay it down for you. So what is going to happen on day 3? We don't know. We never know. But what we did know was that one of the big dogs in the conference was going to be in town. That would be the Alabama Crimson Tide. It's day 3. That means they were going to be joined not only by the Tide, but the Florida Gators. They were going to be there, Mississippi State, and the Oklahoma Sooners. And depending on where you are in the conference, there are varying opinions on a couple of these different teams here about where they might actually end up. Right there in the middle, could make a move up. Maybe this is the year, maybe not. But tonight, like I said, I've got guys from all over the conference that are going to help you see it better. First, we're going to start with WYATT FULTON. He's the host, award-winning host over on Tide 100.9. He's going to tell us all about what's going on with the Crimson Tide. We're going to hear from ROBBIE FOULK, who covers the Mississippi State Bulldogs for On 3, Graham Hall, who covers the Gators from 247 Sports, and then we're going to finish up the night with Jesse Crittenden of the OU Insider. I'm telling you, this might be the night that I'm actually most hyped to get to speak to all the guests that we have coming on. But like I said, we're going to start at the beginning, which was Alabama. Now, this isn't exactly the days when they used to hold SEC Media Days over in Hoover, where Alabama just swarmed the place. I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds of Bama fans would fit into the tiny hotel area over there, and that's all you saw. It's not quite that sort of spectacle these days at SEC Media Days. Things look a little bit different, but one thing's for sure. Alabama was coming with a purpose. Kalen DeBoer, there are questions going into year 2. Some people think they're big questions. Other people think not so much, and the trajectory is really good for the Tide. But either way you point at it, there are questions that have to be answered. I mean, this is the same kind of Alabama team that we keep hearing about. And when they showed up in Atlanta today, you've got people talking about this could be the best offensive line in the country, led by Caden Proctor. It could be a top 3 defense in the country, with guys like Deontay Lawson coming back this year, Tim Kennedy coming back. Is that who Alabama's going to be? Well, they're Alabama. They're going to be great. Just how good are they going to be? That, friends, is why I have the experts coming in to chat with you, like WYATT FULTON from Tide 100.9, kind enough to sit in here with us tonight and let us know what's going on. WYATT, how are you doing, buddy? I know you're busy.
I'm doing really good. I appreciate you having me on. And you said it earlier. It's like drinking from a fire hose today with Alabama being in town.
Yeah, there's no two ways around it, because even if you don't cover Alabama, you have to cover Alabama, right? That is who they are. There's really no two ways around it. Now, when I heard DeBoer today, when he stepped to the podium, I wasn't exactly sure what he was going to say, but for the most part, he squared his shoulders and faced up to all the questions that were out there. But at the same time, he was also sounding a little optimistic, right? He addressed the fact that we have to be better in the big moments. He addressed the fact that we have to be better on the road. He focused on consistency and physicality. When I think about consistency and physicality, I don't think that that's something that Alabama's really hurting for. Am I wrong? Or did you hear something different from DeBoer when he was up there today?
No, I think physicality is something that you don't necessarily see Alabama struggling with. The issue, like you mentioned, was consistency last year. Alabama Obviously, they had the really big moments, the get up games, right? The Georgias, the LSUs. They got up for those games, and they did what Alabama did in the days old in those games. It was the letdown spots. It was the unranked opponents on the road. And shout out Chris Marler for providing this stat today. Kalen DeBoer is 15-3 all time against top 25 opponents. He is 10 of his 13 losses have come to unranked opponents, and a lot of those have come on the road. So the issue with Alabama right now is consistency with a lot of these unranked teams. And I think that's something you saw DeBoer really kind of bow up at and challenge today.
Well, the big question, I guess, there's a couple of different ways we can talk about where he went here. So he was asked directly, did Alabama live up to the Alabama standard in 2024? And again, to his credit, he said, we fell short. Now, not being an Alabama person, I'm not certain I know what he means by we fell short. I can't remember if he clarified in the moment or not, but was he talking about of a national championship or just the consistency, the discipline, that sort of stuff, right? The tightness of the locker room. Which way do you think he was going with it, or was it just all the above?
I think it was a mixture of all of the above. He did clarify afterwards. He said, we fell short because we missed the college football playoff. And you look at Alabama, they were the first team out of the college football playoff last year. And so I think it's playoffs or bust in Tuscaloosa. Obviously, it's not, 2011, 2012, 2015, where it's national championship or bust. But if you ask the players, that's the goal. That's why Tim Keenan said today, I came back to win a national title here at Alabama. That is still the standard in Tuscaloosa. Obviously, with the changes in college athletics, the rise of other teams, especially Georgia dominating the 2020s decade that they have so far, that might be a little bit different. But getting to the big dance is the goal for Alabama. That's the standard in Tuscaloosa. So by that standard, last year was a failure, even though there was so much chaos around Alabama and Kalen DeBoer over the last year and a half. The standard is playoffs. You missed that standard last year.
Okay, well, that's fair. I mean, what should we expect from Alabama? I think that's a fair assessment of what we should expect from Alabama from the outside looking in. The big question about what was going on with the Tide heading into the season, of course, is focused on the quarterback situation, the quarterback battle. I, for a long time, have said I think Ty Simpson is the guy. When I heard Kalen talk about it today, though, he was like, if we played today. Now, this is me reading into it a little bit. Is this a situation where it's Ty's job because right now he's the most mentally ready to go, but he's on a short leash, and if it doesn't go well, they're going to make a move? Or is it Ty Simpson's job? And there's a little bit of separation there. I mean, I know we can't know for sure, but what's your feeling about it?
Yeah, that's actually the third time that an Alabama coach has said, if we play today, Ty Simpson is the starter. Ryan Grubb said it at the end of spring practice. Ryan Grubb said it again on our radio shows in Tuscaloosa late last month. And then Kalen DeBoer said it again today. So I think at this point, the big takeaway is your starting quarterback week one is going to be Ty Simpson. You don't throw in a guy like Austin Mack, who has played, I believe, one or two career games. You don't throw him in there at Florida State like that. And you for sure do not throw Keelan Russell, a uber talented five-star freshman, yes, but very, very inexperienced in college football. You don't throw him out there in that environment in week one. So I think I'm about 99% certain that your week one starter on August 30th is going to be Ty Simpson. And then at that point, you can get into the debate of, is he going to have a short leash? Is he going to, is he going to have some wiggle room? I think they'll give him some wiggle room because he's been in this program 4 years. He's in his second year under Kalen DeBoer's system. So from a mental aspect, I think Ty is the guy. You just need somebody who is going to make plays for you, not be a game manager, but you don't need him to be a game changer, right? You don't need AJ McCarron, but you also don't need Bryce Young in this situation. You need somebody who's going to come in and make the plays that need to be made when they need to be made.
Okay, so with that said, and I might terrify you with what I'm about to say, but I've thought about it from a Georgia perspective. And over here in Athens, I, much like you, feel that in our case, Gunnar Stockton's going to take snap one, even though there hasn't been a definitive announcement made, right? He's the guy. And the scary part about that is that if he gets hurt, then we have a young man who's never taken a meaningful snap who is now going to run the show, much like Jake Fromm back in 2017, right? If you flash back. So it sounds like Alabama's in a similar situation. Whether Ty gets it done or not, or whether something happens, then they're going to hand the reins to somebody who really doesn't have any experience. Now, is that as scary for you as an Alabama viewer, somebody who watches them closely, as it is for a Georgia fan when we look at the quarterback situation?
It is. It's a terrifying thought. And, I will say for Georgia, it feels like a pretty big endorsement that Kirby brought Gunnar Stockton to
Yeah.
SEC Media Days. Like, that's kind of the unofficial announcement. Gunner's going to be the starting quarterback in Athens. And I think he's
Right.
going to be a really, really good ball player. No discredit to him. Same thing with Alabama, though. Kalen DeBoer is kind of, I don't want to call it posing, but it is still a quarterback battle. But the general consensus is it's Ty Simpson. You don't want to officially, quote unquote, make that announcement by putting Ty out there at SEC Media Days because that's what everybody's going to run with there. But it's a terrifying thought. Like Alabama, no games have been started by any of Alabama's quarterbacks on their roster right now. And you look at the roster, Ty Simpson's only quote unquote meaningful snap when Alabama wasn't winning by 35 was an incomplete pass in Norman, Oklahoma last season when Jalen Milroe got the breath knocked out of him. So in terms of meaningful snaps, Ty Simpson has one, and the other two quarterbacks have zero.
Well, I like the feeling knowing that we're not alone over here in Athens of being in that precarious position. But that's what football is. You have to play with who you got, and they'll do the best they
Yeah.
can. So let's talk about something where we have a little more surety, right? A little more certainty, and that would be the fact that Ryan Grubb is now back with Kalen DeBoer, and everybody and their mama seems to think that you snap your fingers and this thing's going to put 40 on the board every time they go out there just because those two are together. Forget the fact we've got a new quarterback and all the rest. So, in your mind, I mean, that's the outside perception. In your
Yeah.
mind, what is the comfort level? Obviously, it's higher, but what does it actually mean in terms of how it's going to shake out on the field? Because the thing about Grubb that I know is that not only is he a good play caller, he's also a very good teacher of the game. So, I mean, there's no other way to explain what happened with Penix at Washington, right? From average to a first round draft
hmm
pick. Now you've got a young man here who's put in his time, knows the system. It really could be that good for them, but is that overstating it?
I don't think it's overstating it because you look at their careers apart from one another. Last year, you could argue it was probably the worst years for both Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer, and they were separated from one another. You go back down the track history, DeBoer being at maybe Fresno or Indiana or, Grubb not being with him, and you look at it and say, that was probably Kalen DeBoer's worst offense that he fielded. And you look at Alabama last year, they were very, very inconsistent. And that was the big thing, again, that Kalen DeBoer harped on today. Now, if you want to get into the fact that, was Jalen Milroe a fit, we can. But I think Alabama was held hostage by quarterback play last season. Not saying Jalen Milroe held the team hostage, but that team went as Jalen Milroe went. When he was on his A game in a game like Georgia, Alabama's cooking. They're able to put up 40 points on the board. When Jalen Milroe struggles like he did in Norman, Oklahoma, Alabama can barely put 3 on the board at that point. So I think you take somebody who might be a lower ceiling, but maybe a higher floor at the quarterback position, and then pair him with the just uber talented play caller and play designer that Ryan Grubb is, and then you add Kalen DeBoer on top of that. I think there's absolutely a reason for optimism on the offense in Tuscaloosa.
Okay, so we touched on all the things that everybody knows about. Let's bounce over to the defensive side of the ball right now, because I've heard a lot of people say this is a top 3 Alabama defense. That's how good we're expecting them to be. Are you on that train? How good are they? And is that actually going to be the thing that might cover up any warts that Alabama's offense has early in the year as they figure out the QB thing?
I think last year's defense, you look at last year's defense, it was a top 10 unit for the first time since Jeremy Pruitt was Alabama's defensive coordinator. And you think about the guys who have come through Tuscaloosa since then: Pete Golding, Tosh Lupoy, Kevin Steele making a 1-year return back to Tuscaloosa.
Right.
Last year's defense was better than all of those defenses, even the one Alabama won a national title with in 2020. And now you're returning 9 starters on the defensive side of the ball, give or take. You can kind of include Justin Jefferson in that because he started the final 2 games of the year. Same thing with Bray Hubbard. He started half the season when Keon Sabb broke his foot against Tennessee. You're returning a lot of veteran talent on that defensive front. And then you're also implementing some really, really good, talented young players, inexperienced, but really, really talented in a guy like a James Smith on the defensive line. He's going to be opposite side of Tim Keenan on that defensive line. You're returning LT Overton. You hope Quay Russaw is going to be able to take that next step and be a really good pass rusher as well. And then you look at the secondary. This time last year, the massive question around Alabama was their secondary, the inexperience that they had at that position. This year, I don't think it's an overstatement to say that this could theoretically be a top 3 secondary in the country. So if you've got the veteran experience in the secondary, combine that with a really, really good pass rush and some talented veteran guys at linebacker and Deontay Lawson, Justin Jefferson, and the transfer Nakai Hill Green, I don't think it's so hard to predict who's going to be top 3, especially in the SEC. But I would not be shocked whatsoever if this is a top 3 unit. I expect them to be higher end top 10 unit again this season.
All right. Well, I've said it many, many times. When Alabama rolls into Athens this year, if that unit is top 3, top 5, top 3, anywhere in that neighborhood, I am leaning toward the Tide to win that game between the hedges. But it's not an official pick. We'll get there eventually. So we have gone through offense, defense, coaching philosophies, all that sort of thing. It's time to pony up and say, how does Alabama do this year in the SEC? What is fair? What should we expect from the Tide?
I look at Alabama and I think pairing everything that we've talked about, right? The get up games, we know they're going to get up for certain games. So that's Georgia on the road, right? That's South Carolina on the road. That's Tennessee at home. That's LSU at home. That's Auburn on the road. Well, there's 5 of your SEC games right there that you look at and you say, yep, Alabama's probably got a pretty good chance at that one. My concern for Alabama is when you see Vanderbilt coming to town, right? And I know Vanderbilt got the better of them last year, but nobody's predicting Vanderbilt to go 11-1 this season. As much as Diego Pavia, love listening to him because it gets me a ton of clicks on our websites.
Right.
But nobody's looking at Diego Pavia and saying they can probably knock Alabama off again. You look at that Missouri game, and that's a trap game for Alabama. 11 o'clock in Columbia, Missouri, sandwiched between the Vanderbilt and Tennessee revenge games. And then I look at that Oklahoma game because Oklahoma is such a wild card this season. Brent Venables is a great defensive mind, but they went 6-7 last year. Now his wagon's kind of hitched to John Mateer and Jaden Ott, who played really, really good in some bad conferences. One conference I don't even think has a TV network with John Mateer coming over from Washington State. And so I look at the Missouri game and I say that is my biggest fear for Alabama this upcoming season, that being the trap game. But I would say Alabama, very reasonable to expect them to go, 7-1 in the SEC, maybe 6-2 if they get clipped by, Missouri on the road, and then Oklahoma comes in and just lights them up.
Okay. So it sounds like you're confidently Alabama over Georgia in Athens. Is that right?
I'm not going to say confidently, but that is a game. Again, that's a get-up game, right? That's a game that Kalen DeBoer is typically going to have his team ready to go for. I picked Georgia over Alabama last season, and then I'm sitting there at halftime saying, man, I look like an idiot right now. Then Georgia, of course, makes that game a lot more interesting than the first half. Xavier Brown does what he does at the end of that ball game to seal it for Alabama. But I'm not going to say confidently. There's question marks around both of these teams. I'm not saying concerns because I think Alabama and Georgia have both earned the right to not be doubted when there's a question mark. But there is a question mark around some of these teams, around both Alabama and Georgia.
No, I think that's completely fair. Like I said, today I'm leaning Tide myself. So there you go. Let's talk about the Dogs a little bit more. We're kind of launching into it. From the Alabama neighborhood, if you're looking into Athens, you just sort of hinted about it there. What do you see Georgia looking like heading into 25? I mean, Kirby's still there, a lot of continuity, new quarterback questions. Where do you have them?
I look at Georgia and I expect them to be a very successful team this season. Last year, there were a lot of concerning points, right? Running the ball was a major, major concern, especially for a Kirby Smart-led Georgia team. Georgia's normally a top 5 unit running the football. Last year, I think they were outside of the top 100. You definitely do not expect that to happen again, regardless of who's up there. But there are, again, concerning points. You lose, 2 two very, very talented edge rusher linebacker types in Michael Williams and Jalen Walker to the NFL draft. You've got to replace three starters along that offensive line in Dylan Fairchild, Tate Ratledge, and Jared Wilson. You're replacing your quote unquote starting running back from last season with the ETM brother. I always get them confused. I apologize.
It's all right.
So you look at that and you say, okay, Georgia's bread and butter has a lot of questions going into the season. But then you look at other spots, right? You look at the linebacker position led by a guy like CJ Allen, and you say, yep, that's a really good spot for Georgia. You look at the wide receiver position, who normally outside of George Pickens, a lot of people don't view as a strength for Georgia over the past several years. But you've got Zachariah Branch. I believe Dylan Bell's back for Georgia. Oscar Delp and Lucky Lawson are running it back at the tight end position. So you look at pass catcher for Georgia, and you say, that's going to be a strength for them this season. Their job is to make Gunnar Stockton's life extremely, extremely easy. And I think with those pass catchers, it absolutely can. And so I look at Georgia, and I think they're going to be a little bit different philosophically this upcoming season, because your strength is in an area that maybe it hasn't been the last couple of seasons. When you look at the 21 national title, the 22 national championship team, or even 23 competing for that SEC title against Alabama. So I look at Georgia, and again, there's questions on the roster. There's questions on every roster in the SEC.
Yep.
But I look at Georgia and I say, Kirby Smart has earned the right to not be doubted when there are questions. I'm not calling them concerns. I'm calling them questions, because more often than not, Kirby Smart's going to have an answer.
Well, that's what he shows us. As we say, trusting Kirby, right? So we trust him to manage that roster and get them ready to go. Before I let you go, you said something earlier about how you think Gunner's actually going to do pretty well, and my ears perked up a little bit, because in the Georgia ecosystem, there are those of us who, aren't as high on him. I am someone who thinks he's going to be just fine. I think he's going to be better than just fine. But there are some who don't. And outside the Georgia ecosystem, that seems to be the thing that people first and foremost want to ding Georgia on, is Gunner and how he did the 2 games he had last year. Could you take a second and just talk a little bit more about him and what you see in him and why you think maybe he is going to do okay?
Yeah, we actually got to talk with Gunner a couple of days, or I believe it was yesterday at SEC Media Days. He's very calm. He's very cool. He's very collected. He's not a guy that's going to get rattled super easily, I don't think, especially having to deal with the media scrum at, SEC Media Days.
Right.
But he's a guy, when you look at his situation last year, right, he was playing when Georgia was up 49-3. I mean, he wasn't playing meaningful snaps. And then out of left field, he gets thrown into the fire like that in the second half of the SEC title game against, I think statistically was a top 2 defense in the SEC last season in Texas. And he led that comeback. Obviously, the Texas linebacker made an illegal hit, which knocked Gunner out of the rest of that game. But Carson's able to come in one-handed, hand the ball off. Georgia's your SEC champion once again. And then his first career start comes against a Notre Dame squad that, yeah, they were banged up, but they were bought in behind a defensive-minded head coach. And Notre Dame was a team last year that we looked at them at the start of the year and said, hey, I don't know how they're going to fare along the offensive and defensive line. And then by the end of the season, we said, oh, another guy got hurt? Cool. They're just going to fill that hole. They're going to fill that roster spot, and they're going to keep churning along. So he got dealt a very bad hand, and I'm super excited to see what the rest of his career plays out as. But I look at Gunner and I say, all right, he's clearly got the talent. He's got the weapons around him. If you can protect him and maybe speed up his processing speed just a little bit, which you normally can do in an off season, I look at Gunner and I think, yeah, I mean, you probably can get B+, A- level quarterback play out of him in the SEC. And for a roster that's as loaded as Georgia's typically is, even in the modern era of NIL and the portal, all you need out of a Georgia quarterback is B+ level quarterback play, and you're competing for an SEC title.
Well, there you have it, friends. Straight from the Alabama man himself, award-winning host over on Tide 100.9, Mr. Wyatt Fulton. Wyatt, thank you so much for sitting in here with us for a little while. I really appreciate you taking the time. I certainly feel smarter, and now I feel a little bit more like I have more ammunition, right? As we move toward that game in September, I feel like I'm going to be on more sturdy ground as I start to talk about it and break it down.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much. And well, I'll have to get you on our airwaves sometime to help break down this Georgia Alabama matchup. We're already asking Kirby about the matchup, and it's July. So I'm excited to get between the hedges here in late September.
Hey, it's never too early, and all you have to do is drop me a line, brother. I will be there like that.
Appreciate you, man.
All right, Wyatt, thank you. Have a good evening.
You as well.
All right, everybody, there you have it. It doesn't get any better than that, friends. That's somebody who's inside the bubble in Tuscaloosa. They know what they're talking about, and that is what we like over here on this channel. Now, as I told you off the top, we're going to bounce all across the conference. We're going to hit every team that was in Atlanta today, and next up is the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Now, I have affectionately referred to them as the Bizarro Bulldogs for years now. No disrespect intended. It's just always weird when teams have the same mascot to me. But they are doing their thing over in Stark Vegas. And last year, things didn't go so well. 2-10 for the Bulldogs. They didn't win a game inside the conference under Jeff Lebby, who was in his first year running the show over there for Hell State. But he's having to rebuild his roster. They essentially are recreating that team over in Stark Vegas. And he gets his quarterback back in Blake Shapen, who he lost after the fourth game of the year last year. There's a lot that has to be done in Mississippi State's program before they are back up and competing inside the SEC. But Jeff Lebby believes that he has them on the right track to make that happen. I did a little bit of digging this afternoon. I was able to talk with ROBBIE FOULK, who covers Mississippi State for On3. Let's check out my conversation with ROBBIE earlier this afternoon and learn a little bit more about the Mississippi State Bulldogs. We welcome in ROBBIE FOULK, who covers Mississippi State for On3, and he's going to tell us everything that happened at the podium today in Atlanta. ROBBIE, how's it going, buddy?
Going good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, not a problem at all. I really appreciate it. When I heard Jeff Lebby step to the podium today, he was obviously talking about moving things forward for Mississippi State. I mean, we're looking at a team that went 2-10 last year, winless in the conference. They lost their starting quarterback midway through the year, not even midway through the year. And the thing he was talking about, it seemed to be, we want to change the outcome, right? We want to move this thing forward. We want to grow the roster. We want to fix the holes, all that kind of stuff. Is that what you heard, or is that just too broad a way to look at it?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely where he's coming from. He really is working on and he has been working on addressing every single position group, getting better across the board. And ultimately, the goal is to have a better roster, and in turn, you have a better football team. And Mississippi State, when he took over, they just did not. One of the things that he's talked about is they have not had even the practice players that they felt good about that were making their team better, scout team, things like that. They haven't had the depth to even do that. So what he had to do is almost turn this roster over completely. There are some players returning from last year's team, and some key players are back. But for the most part, they really needed to address just about every single positional group and make every single group better. It started kind of on the offensive and defensive lines, but they had to go out in the transfer portal and they had to go get guys that could help them win football games and get players too that could really make that locker room a locker room that could bring the team together, because I think they did have some issues there too. And that's going to happen when you have three coaches in 3 years.
Yeah.
You just don't have the continuity. And one of the things that he wanted to do that he felt was so important, and a lot of fans have disagreed with it, but what he felt was so important was having that continuity within the coaching staff, that he had the same coaches doing the same thing every single day, that players knew what to expect out of them. And it's an interesting approach. We'll see if it works, especially on the defensive side with the issues that they have. But I think he felt like it was more important for this program to have the consistency with the voices within the positional groups that could help kind of turn this thing around. And I think that's kind of been the focus for him over the last year, is just making the players better and building that roster and building the culture that he really wants to build.
Well, obviously, let's stay right there on the stability part of that, right? I mean, because he threw out a number today. I have been talking about Georgia, saying that I only have like 47% of the roster this year are players in years 1 and 2. Kirby corrected me yesterday and said it's actually 54%. Then I heard Jeff step to the podium today and say, no, wait, for us, it's 80% of the roster are in year 1 or 2 at Mississippi State. And he talks about buying into the process. Could you just speak to the overwhelming challenge that is? You mentioned 3 coaches in 3 years, and now you're rolling the roster over like this. It's at the same time both necessary and also unsettling if you're a Mississippi State fan.
Yeah, you have to have. I feel like the teams that have the most success in this, um, in this sport and in most sports, are the ones that have those players that have been in the system for a while, that have played together, they have the continuity, they have the chemistry. I think that attrition is something that sometimes is necessary, and sometimes you like to have your players back. You like to be able to keep your roster intact. And for Mississippi State, they needed to lose some of the guys on the previous roster. They needed to kind of clean house a little bit. But from here, you've got to build from the ground up now. If you're Jeff Lebby in Mississippi State, I don't think this should be the norm for them, and I don't think they want it to be the norm. I think they want to have a program that has consistency, that is churning out players and filtering players into the NFL again. That's been a problem for them. They want to be able to develop. They want to be able to evaluate, recruit, and keep those guys on campus. That's, to me, the most important thing that teams do in this era is not recruiting the transfer portal and going out and doing that and turning over rosters each and every year. To me, it's keeping players on campus, developing them, and then filling in those empty spots in your roster with the transfer portal. I think the transfer portal is a very big tool for teams, but the teams that are going to win at the highest level, they have a true program that's developing kids, that's bringing in redshirt freshmen and redshirt sophomores and getting them on the field, and those players steadily kind of building up to where they want them to be. I think those are the teams that are going to win, and I think that's where Jeff Lebby wants this program to be. But unfortunately for him, he had to have that roster turnover to kind of start building here, and we'll see how it goes for Mississippi State this season. But after this year, they really need to be able to sustain a little bit and build on what they do this year.
Well, the one silver lining in turnover like that is clearly there's opportunity there. And we heard Levy today sort of spin it in that direction. Everywhere you look, there's opportunity to be an impact player for Mississippi State this year. And obviously, you hit the portal for needs. And one of those needs was Anthony Evans, who comes over from the University of Georgia. We're all very familiar with him. Along with him, are there other players that you might point to and say these are guys that really have a chance to do something immediately? Because we're going to get to Blake Shapen here in a second, but he threw out Anthony's name today as one that he's looking for big things from this year.
Yeah, I think offensively, when you look at some of the wide receivers, and they had to rehaul the wide receiver group again this year, and Anthony Evans is certainly a guy that he's playing a position that has been very successful in Jeff Lebby's offenses. When you look at guys like Elijah Moore that did big things at Ole Miss, and Stoops at Oklahoma, and guys like that have played that position. Kevin Coleman last year had a breakthrough season for Mississippi State, almost 1,000 yards receiving, 80 catches. Anthony Evans, I think, is going to have a high volume of opportunities this year for Mississippi State, more than what he got at Georgia. And we'll see if he's able to come through at that position. But I certainly think that there is a chance that he can. He's a very talented player, and he's playing in an offense that brings out the best in those receivers and at that position. So that's kind of a key thing. I think Aiden Williams, another wide receiver from Ole Miss, a Mississippi kid that just about every year has gotten a lot of buzz from Ole Miss people from what he does in training camp and summer workouts in the spring, but just kind of was in a log jam over there of talented receivers at Ole Miss. I'm interested to see how he does, because I think Jeff Lebby, who recruited him and coached him at Ole Miss, I think he knows what he has in him, or he definitely wouldn't have gone after him, and he had a good spring. I'm interested to see how he does. And a couple of other receivers that came in from the portal. We'll see how it all shakes out. Brennan Thompson actually represented Mississippi State today. Jeff Lebby's very high on him, a speedy guy that had some big plays at Oklahoma. We'll see if he's able to turn that into something just like Anthony Evans. And then you have other guys on the offensive line. Mississippi State went out and got Virginia tackle Blake Steen that I think is going to be able to come in and compete for left tackle right away. They went to the transfer portal in the spring because new offensive line coach Phil Lodeholt did not like what he had at the offensive line. And guys like Blake Steen, I think, are going to be able to come in and compete right away. Zachary Owens, who was a Colorado kid, comes over with Phil Lodeholt. Tremendous potential for him. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets in the mix this summer as well. And Kobe Keenum from Kentucky coming in, competing at center. Brennan Smith competing at center. They brought in, 5 or 6 offensive linemen that's really going to push that group. And then you go over to, Luke Cromenhawk at quarterback. If something happens to Blake Shapen, that's a guy that last year was a starter for Florida State as a true freshman, one of the top quarterbacks in the country coming out of high school, 4-star transfer portal guy. I think he has a chance to do something if Mississippi State needs him. At running back, you got Fluff Bothwell, who was arguably the top running back in the transfer portal. Mississippi State was able to pull him over from South Alabama. I think that he has a big future ahead of him and can really help Mississippi State at the running back position. And then you look at all those guys in the front seven, and Mississippi State really had to reform that defensive line group. They needed not only bodies, they needed SEC bodies, and they needed playmakers at the defensive end position, at the edge position with linebacker. They had 10 sacks as a team last year, which is one of the worst in the country. And so they had to go out and they had to go find pass rushers. They had to go out and they had to find big defensive tackles that were going to be able to impact the run game and also help out the guys on the edge in the passing game. So those guys are going to be huge. You have some linebackers in there. Jalen Smith coming over from Tennessee that I think is going to play a huge factor for Mississippi State. Darian Gillette coming over from Texas. The front seven, I think, is going to be significantly better for Mississippi State this year, and I think that's going to impact the entire defense. But those are just a few names that I think, transfer portal players that I think can help the Bulldogs this year.
Well, like we said, a lot of opportunity. But if we look at the other side of that coin, that would be the stability part. And they do get Blake Shapen back after losing him after 4 games last year. What would you say that's going to bring back to this offense? I mean, Shapen looked pretty good, at times when he was out there. I understands the offense. What kind of comfort level is that going to bring to that unit, having him back on the field?
I think anytime you can bring a quarterback back in an offense after one season in the system, it's a good thing for you. That's the guy that's leading the charge for the offense. That should be your top leader. That should be the guy that you turn to when you need a big play. And he is a guy that a lot of everybody trusts on that offense. They all believe that he's going to make the right decisions. They're turning to him for the next call. I think that his familiarity with the offense and his relationship with Jeff Lebby and his skill set, I think, is great for Mississippi State. It'll be good for these young quarterbacks to learn under him because next year they're going to have a quarterback battle. And you need to keep him healthy. You need to keep him upright. And you need to keep guys off of him. So I think it's huge to have him back, but State now has to keep him healthy and allow him the opportunity to perform for a full season because you really need that consistent voice in that huddle. And having a guy that's a fifth-year guy running the offense is never really a bad thing for me.
Right. Experience is experience, and there's only one way to get it. Let's just shift gears for a second here as we put a bow on everything from the Mississippi State Bulldogs to take a look at my Georgia Bulldogs. As you sit across the conference there and you look back to Athens, what is your perception of what that team's going to be here in 25? Because there are honestly questions across the board, due to player movement and things like that. So how do they look to you?
Yeah, I think they've got another good squad. I mean, I think that Kirby has put this thing in a position where they are just kind of a machine right now in terms of the program. Last year was in some ways probably like a step away from where they were, and they were still right there in the mix. And to me, you have a system in place, one of the best coaches in the game, and a great coaching staff that hasn't had to rely on the transfer portal heavily. They've done things how a lot of the teams in the country have done it that have been really successful: the Alabamas, the Texases, the Georgias. Those teams, they build with their high school recruiting, they retain those players, and then they fill where they need to fill with the transfer portal. And I think that's where the teams that are going to win big, I think that's where they're going to live. They have it figured out, and I think that you got a new quarterback in there, a guy that I think last year, late in the year, ran things fairly well. I think he's going to be able to kind of continue that. It's probably going to start and end with the offense. The defense always seems to find a way to be playing at its best, and that's not really a surprise when you have one of the best defensive minds in the game. But the offense to me is I'm always kind of up and down on Mike Bobo and kind of what he brings to the table in the offense. I'm not a huge fan of it, but at the same time, you have the personnel that you can run some of the things that he runs. So they can get away with a lot of those things because they have a big offensive line that has always seems to be a big strength for that team. They always have big, strong running backs, and they usually have quarterbacks that are really smart. They manage the game well. So I'm interested to see how it plays out. I think they're going to be right back in the mix. It wouldn't shock me to see them right back in the mix for national title as well. But as long as Kirby's at the helm and they're rolling things the way that they are, it's hard to imagine them having many down years.
Well, my Bulldogs will be coming out to Starkville a little bit later this year, and I'm looking forward to that one. That should be a good time. Robbie, I want to thank you again for taking time to sit in with us. I feel smarter now that I know more about the Bulldogs from Mississippi State. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on.
There are things I can't say on YouTube, but I say them on How About Them Dogs Plus. Want to learn more? Just click the link below. Go premium. Be elite. Well, there you have it. How are you feeling, fans, SEC fans? Because I love to talk about Georgia football. We do it all the time, but when you're in the middle of this thing called SEC Media Days, I think it's only right to branch out a little bit, look across the conference, and try to be smarter football fans about it all. And thankfully, we have been able to have people come on the show here who I think are doing that for us. They're helping us. Now, this next team that I want to talk about is the team that I love to dislike more than any other. And of course, I'm talking about the Florida Gators. When Bill Napier and the Florida Gators finished the season last year, it's fair to say that they had found something. They had figured something out because they finished the year on a winning streak that was among the best, if not the best, in the entire country. And the kicker of it was their future at quarterback wasn't even healthy the entire run of that winning streak. I'm talking about DJ Lagway. Now, if you've watched him play, this is a young man that when you just see him on the field, you're like, that guy could be a problem. That guy, if my team has to square with him, could do some things that some other guys around the conference can't do. Now, he was only a freshman last year, but whether it was running the ball or throwing the ball, Lagway showed us that he has the ability to make things happen for the Florida Gators. And somewhere along the way, around the middle of the year, the rest of the team decided, you know what? I think we might actually be able to do some things this year. Now, there are a lot of voices out there, especially the further we were away from college football season, who saw the way Florida finished everything last year, saw the coaching turnaround that Billy Napier had executed in in Gainesville last year. And they were the early pick to really jump up and bite some people here in the SEC this year. They were the trendy pick to run out there and say they're going to make a big move here in 2025. As we've gotten closer to the season, now there are other things that are sort of taking precedent here, right? By the time now that we've made it to SEC Media Days, there are other things people are looking at and going, okay, Florida is getting better. I think everybody can agree on that much, but they aren't yet in the top tier of the conference. Now, that's the people outside looking in. In Gainesville, that's not how they feel. Billy Napier, and he talked about this today from the podium at SEC Media Days. He honestly believes that the development that they're doing at the University of Florida right now is working. He believes that the order of things, very much like the way Georgia does it, where they focus on high school recruiting and then only go into the portal to fill gaps, much like what we just heard Robbie FOULK talk about. That seems to be the system they are employing down at the University of Florida. And again, Billy and DJ and a lot of the other Gators that are on the squad right now, they are bought into it. Going into 2025, you have to assume that the light that came on in the middle of 2024 is still on. I mean, nobody would think that you'd walk in there, turn the lights off, and they're going to start from zero. Yes, it's a new team, but the belief that they had inside the building, that you would have to think is carrying over. Now, even with all that said, if you look at the Florida Gators schedule this year, most people think it's probably the toughest schedule in all of college football. So even if they are improved, can they do much better than what they did last year? Keep in mind, in case you need a reminder, they went 8-5 last year, and they went 4-4 inside the conference. They finished really, really well. They flashed, telling everybody, hey, we are a force to be reckoned with down the stretch here. But even if they have continued that upward trajectory, the schedule that they're going to be facing this year is a strong headwind. It could be enough to where they might finish 8-5 again. They might finish 4-4 inside the conference again and be a much better football team. That's just the reality of life here in the Southeastern Conference. But Florida is, I don't have any issue saying, as much as I dislike them, I don't have any issue saying that I think they are a better football team heading into 2025 than they were in 2024. I think that when you look at what they've been able to do with the roster, the way they have been able to recruit to their needs, and then keep those players on campus, they've started to build some depth that they didn't have when Billy Napier first arrived in Gainesville. They have been able to go get superstar level players like DJ Lagway, who, again, there are a lot of people who think he is the best quarterback in the conference. Now, the folks at LSU and Garrett Nussmeier might have something to say about that, but there are people who absolutely throw his name around right there along with Lenore Sellers, Nussmeier, and others. Florida is getting better. As a Georgia fan, obviously, I don't like that. I don't want Florida to be good ever. And one of the positions I took last year was that even though I am perpetually and inevitably and irreparably scarred from the 90s playing Steve Spurrier's Florida Gators team as a Georgia Bulldog fan, the history of Florida is that what they were last year and what they were the year before was actually more of a return to the mean of what they had been historically. And the 90s, which happened to be the era that I was paying the closest attention and was the most emotionally wrapped up in it all, that was the aberration. It had been Georgia prior to the 90s that had dominated that series. It had been Georgia and Alabama and Auburn and Tennessee and other teams like that that had dominated inside the conference, not the Florida Gators. That just in retrospect lets you know that what Steve Spurrier was able to accomplish was something that was really impressive. You got to keep in mind, Spurrier was at Duke before he was at Florida, and he won at Duke back when nobody thought anybody could win at Duke in football. Then he came to Florida, tapped into the Florida recruiting base, was innovative in his scheme and his strategy, and then you saw what happened under Spurrier at Florida in the 90s. I still have nightmares about it. Kirby Smart, he was impacted directly by what Steve Spurrier was able to do at Florida in the 90s. Keep in mind that in 1995, the Florida Gators came to Athens and are the only team to ever score 50 on the Dogs between the hedges. And Steve Spurrier did that on purpose because he wanted to be able to say that. Who was on that field in 1995? Took that loss on the chin? Kirby Smart. So when Georgia plays Florida, I know coach speak is what it is, but I can't help but believe that Florida is personal for Kirby Smart. We may have had a little bit of insight into that a couple of years ago when the halftime speech from the Florida game was leaked, and we all know what Kirby had to say that afternoon. Florida's better. Are they good enough to make their way into that upper echelon of the conference? I'm not so sure. I mean, because we're still talking about Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Texas, probably Texas A&M, and then we might start talking about the likes of Florida or Tennessee. Because this is a year where, although there are programs heading in different directions, Tennessee and Florida might end up in the same spot, which is vying for positions 6 through 8 or 6 through 9 inside the conference. It's going to be very interesting because there's a lot of optimism in Gainesville right now. There's a lot of belief inside that building. And as Billy Napier said this afternoon, there's something to be said for the power of belief, especially in the game of football, because it teaches you lessons that you really can't find anywhere else. That's why I agree with him in saying that it is the best football, or it is the best game on the planet, that being football. Billy, his thing at Florida, from what I can tell, was that going into last year, I was among those voices who was saying, I'm not sure he's going to make it to the end of the year. I wasn't even sure he was going to make it to the Georgia game. But they weathered that early storm when things look really, really bad. And then, as we just discussed, on the back half of the year, they looked like a different team. And that was solely because of the infusion of a talented player like DJ Lagway, thanks to the season-ending injury of Graham Mertz, and then the belief in the process. And we talk about that a lot as Georgia fans. You know that. If you have a group of young men who are all pulling in the same direction, that can be a very powerful thing. And last season, Billy and DJ and the Gators were able to sort of catch that in a bottle and ride it to a good finish. And it has everybody thinking differently about Florida heading into 2025 here. Now, so far, all of this conversation has just been me, a Georgia fan, talking about the Florida Gators. We haven't even gotten into what Billy said today or what DJ said or any of the nuts and bolts of the program. This is just my perspective. I haven't done this for the other programs because, as I said off the top, there's no team I like to dislike more than the Florida Gators. So I wanted to take a few moments here and just sort of share my thoughts about what it is that they have going on. But don't worry, we're going to break them down a little bit, and I do expect we're going to have somebody here to help me do that. But when Georgia goes down to play Florida in Jacksonville this year, just like every year, I'm going to be nervous. I'm nervous because I'm scarred from what happened in the 90s. When Georgia had a competitive team against Steve Spurrier's Florida Gators, things just didn't seem to go their way. Like Florida would get the bounce. In retrospect, when I think back on that, the team with the better players usually gets those bounces. And that's what was happening with Florida. They had really good players, and they had a superb head coach who was putting them in the best position to be effective. And the Georgia effort coaching staff at the time, they weren't matching up. That's the bottom line. So I'm scarred by what happened in the 90s. And every time that Georgia makes the trip down to Jacksonville, even in 21 and 22, I was nervous because I had just lived through what happened in 2020 in a game where I never thought Georgia was going to lose until they did. And I'm like, here we go again. Then 21 happens, 22 happens, then 23 and 24 happen. Georgia's back on a 4-game winning streak in this series. And I'm like, all is right in the world. The Florida Gator fans, They dislike Georgia fans as much as I like them. That's why this rivalry matters. That's why inside the SEC, we have 3 of the best rivalries in college football. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you have now Texas and Oklahoma, the Red River Shootout, Red River rivalry, whatever you want to call it. There's a little bit of hate in the hearts of both fan bases when they meet in Dallas to play that game in the Cotton Bowl. You have Tennessee and Alabama that played on the 3rd Saturday in every October. That one is long, historic, and important. And I didn't even mention the Iron Bowl, which is probably the best rivalry game in all of college football. I think is better than whatever Michigan and Ohio State have going on up there. You have the Georgia-Florida game, which, like Texas and Oklahoma, is a 50-50 stadium split. And I guarantee you the fan bases between Georgia and Florida have hate in their hearts when they show up down in Jacksonville. It goes on and on. There's Georgia-Auburn, the Deep South's oldest rivalry. It goes on and on inside this conference. But Georgia and Florida, when they tangle, it means something a little bit extra to me. The longer you watch that series, the more you see the way the ball bounces, the more you remember the glory days of Georgia before Spurrier, and then you are old enough to have lived through the pain that was Steve Spurrier in the 90s, and now to be on the other side of it and see that the coach we have in Athens right now, Kirby Smart, takes this game personally, believes it's an important game for a lot of different reasons, and prioritizes it as one that he definitely does not want to lose as the head coach at the University of Georgia. I mean, life is good, and it just means something a little bit different. There's no 2 ways around it. And when you have a player injected into the series like DJ Lagway, a guy that is just fun to watch, the kind of player that, and I'm just going to be honest, as a college football fan, I would stop and watch even if I had to buy a ticket, right? He is a lot of fun. He is very talented. And furthermore, and putting all the Georgia-Florida stuff aside, he's a nice young man. It's hard to not root for DJ Lagway. Now, I'm going to manage as a Georgia Bulldog, right? I'm going to manage to root against him, no problem. But I do want to sort of, here in the off season and talking season, I want to toss the man a bouquet and say, I see you and I appreciate your game. Now, if we think back to what he did against Georgia last year, he was doing really well against Georgia, and Georgia was doing a whole lot to help Florida in that game. And then he gets hurt. And I'm still not certain how that injury happened. I wasn't certain when it happened, and the replay didn't help me. But clearly he had an injury there, a strain or whatever it was, and he wasn't able to continue that game. But I am not one who buys into the idea that if DJ Lagway had stayed in the game, that the Gators absolutely would have beaten Georgia last year. I just don't think that's the case. Georgia played better in the second half. They did some things better on defense, right? They figured out some things on offense. That's why they won the game. But it certainly would have made me a lot more nervous in the second half had DJ Lagway been the one out there trying to bring the Gators back. There's no 2 ways about that. So I'm somebody who is looking forward to watching Georgia play Florida this year. And part of the reason, in all honesty, is because DJ Lagway is going to be playing quarterback for the Florida Gators. Now, I want to see him on his back 5-6 times in the game. I want to see Georgia play it better defensively so that his running threat is not such a threat. I want to see the Dogs get after him. I want to see the Dogs whip those Gators. But I do have to give him his bouquet. I do have to give him his roses and say, this is a young man who is a good player. And I do think that Billy Napier's team heading into 2025 is a better team than the one he had in 2024. At the end of the year, is that going to be different in terms of wins and losses? Will they make it back to 8 games? I'm not sure, and we're all going to have to find out together. But the one thing that I can tell you for sure is that these are just the ramblings of a Georgia Bulldog fan. Now it is time for me to bring on somebody who actually can tell us a little bit more in depth about what's going on down in Gainesville and help us get ready for the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. And that would be Graham Hall of 247 Sports. He covers the Gators down there. Graham, these folks are tired of hearing me talk about the Gators right now because I've spent the last 10 or 15 minutes just talking about how the Gators are the team that I enjoy disliking more than any other. So come on in here, make us all smarter, and tell us exactly what happened today at SEC Media Days when Billy Napier stepped to the podium and DJ Lagley was along in tow, teeing us up for the 2025 season. Thanks for being here, man. I'm happy to see you.
It's my pleasure. It's always a exciting time this time of year where football's right around the corner and we're saving the last couple days of summer here. In 2 weeks, these teams are going to be taking the field for fall camp, and the excitement, as Steve Spurrier once said, it's no longer talking season. The game's got to get played. It's time to, shut up and put up and see what happens here. And I know it's an exciting time for Florida fans, obviously Georgia fans as well. And it was pretty much the status quo for Florida in Atlanta today. I don't want to say it was boring, but you didn't get anything that was revelatory. There's a saying among the media that those 15, 20 minutes that you spend at the podium, you're not really going to learn a whole lot about a head coach except what they did this summer, the vacations they went on. Les Miles was pretty famous for that, where he'd spend 20 minutes talking all about everything he could possibly imagine. And what he's doing is he's limiting the questions that he's possibly going to have to face. And Billy Napier, I thought, did a really good job of that. And no offense to him, of saying a lot, but not really divulging anything. He talked about the depth of the team, how he really thinks that with revenue sharing and NIL, which has been a common talking point, that you want to see it get back to being about transforming lives. The saying, they want to see it become more about transformational rather than transactional, which is the current era of college football that we're in. And that's not going away anytime soon with revenue sharing taking over. You heard a little bit about DJ Lagway, but in the closed door session that Billy Napier had with reporters in Atlanta, he's not going to talk too much about specific injuries. And DJ Lagway, who also not only had that, I guess you could say, infamous shoulder injury that so many people have heard about now that kept him as a modified participant during spring camp, he also had a lower body injury, which I've heard is a hernia. He also dealt with the hamstring injury last year, but he made it clear, assuaged any concerns, that he's going to be fully healthy. He's going to be a full participant when Florida opens fall camp in 2 weeks from today. So that's the sigh of relief for Florida fans, but that was expected. He had come out repeatedly and said, hey, we're just being very cautious with him, making sure that this doesn't get aggravated anymore. And I think a lot of people, not just Florida fans, understand that that should be what Florida does. And I'm not saying that Billy Napier's tenure at Florida is necessarily inherently tied to this 19-year-old, potentially dynamic, potential Heisman Trophy candidate. I'm not saying that he's, hand and foot, that if DJ Lagway goes down or isn't successful, that we're seeing the end of Billy Napier. But so much is riding on Billy Napier's tenure at Florida when it comes to Florida's offense needing to be more explosive, because they have all the pieces. They have 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen back. When you look around the SEC, that is absolutely not the case for an abundance of teams that are out there right now. And it seems to be declining on a year-to-year basis with NIL and quote-unquote poaching and tampering, where you return all your guys, especially, an All-American and Jake Slaughter, a guy who's a potential first-round pick also in Austin Barber, getting Najee Harris back as well. Damian George was a guy who initially looked like he was going to enter the portal. He comes back. You got 4 or 5 offensive linemen back. You've got an abundance of talent at the skill positions. Jaden Ball was a breakout freshman and running back last year. They added some guys from the portal in J. Michael Sturdivant. They get Eugene Wilson back, Dallas Wilson. This is a team that seems like it has all the components for Florida to be successful, but they need a healthy quarterback, because you go back to last year, you look at the Georgia game, and I'm not someone who's going to sit here and say, well, Florida would have won that game if DJ Lagway doesn't get hurt, because so much, has to happen for the second half of the game there. But they were leading in that contest and were still putting up a fight well into the fourth quarter. But you saw the drop-off, and no disrespect to him whatsoever, from Lagway to Aiden Warner, a guy who transferred from Yale, was coming off an ACL tear of his own, had only been fully healthy for 3, maybe 4 months. First SEC action against the Dogs. I mean, what can people expect, right? So if that is the case where you lose Lagway, they didn't get Deshaun Purdy to come in. He ends up transferring out before he really ever even really steps foot in Gainesville. They add Harrison Bailey, but it's probably Warner as the number 2 guy right now. If the drop-off from Lagway to Warner is as significant or even as near significant as it was last year, then, Florida, I don't want to say they're in a lot of trouble, but their ceiling gets much lower in my mind. So protecting Lagway and making sure that he's healthy is the main talking point for Florida, and that was the case today in Atlanta. Jake Slaughter also underwent a minor procedure in the offseason. Him and Caleb Banks, another guy who could potentially be a first-round pick if he strings together a strong season. Those guys had off-season procedures, making sure that they're fully healthy. That was a point of contention and a talking point today. And then a lot of it, I hate to say that it was boring, but most of the conversations were things people had heard before, especially if they're paying so much attention, as we know college football fans are paying attention to out there. You don't want to be a team talking about scandal, which we've seen so often at SEC Media Days with, LSU, like I mentioned with Les Miles. Part of the reason why he talked for 20 minutes was to not have to talk about the unsavory aspects that are out there in this time of year in summer where, things happen. Let me just call it like that. In Tennessee, they had the NCAA violations that came out right before SEC Media Days a few years back. You don't really want to be talking about the unsavory things. So it's a good thing if you're only assuaging concerns and you're saying things that people have heard all before, and you come out of Atlanta or Dallas or Nashville, Birmingham, wherever SEC Media Days is, and you don't really learn too much more, because that means that you don't really have a lot of bad things hanging over your head. And most of the talking points are going to be about rev share, the 9-game SEC schedule, college football playoff expansion, which, that's not really something that Florida is going to be pressed too much on until they can show that they can get there. So for Florida fans, probably was a little bit of a boring one. And, depending on how you look at it, that's a good thing or it's a bad thing, because maybe it's not going to get you too excited about the season when you're just really kind of saying, hey, nothing's going on that's wrong here. Status quo. We're regrouping in 2 weeks. That's all I got for you. And for Florida, that pretty much is what went down today.
Yeah, I see where you say that. I refer to those coach speak moments up there on the stage, those 20 minutes, as the bit of a state of the union. Here's where we are, and in that you rehash a lot of stuff. But some things did sort of come through to be clear. Like you said, you mentioned Lagway. He wants everybody to know that he's going to be okay. It sounds like he's ready to go. I hadn't actually heard the hernia thing, but either way, it sounds like he's throwing and ready to go. So that's a good thing. The thing about what Napier has going on right now is, when he was at the podium, even though it was stuff that we may have heard before, he was continuing what finished last year, right? He's like, just spot the ball. Let's go play. We were as hot as anybody. And he's talking about the belief, the confidence, and the momentum that they built at the end of last year, and how that's carried through into spring, and how they're hoping to use that as a springboard into 2025. So the other piece that he talked about was the development and how what they're doing is working. You talked about having guys come back and how you have the 4 guys on the offensive line. You've got the roster management that has allowed them to be in the position where people have them as a potential riser inside the conference. But depth is still an issue overall. I think Billy talked about that. When we're looking at expectations for this Gator team, where would you put them? Because I was saying before you came on, they could be really improved over the 24 squad, but because of the schedule they're facing and the things we just discussed about depth overall, and that sort of thing, roster management, movement, I don't know that they're going to be any better than they were, even though they're a better football team. So record-wise, they could get back to 7 or 8 wins and be a much better football team, but not have it show. Am I off base? Would you agree with that at all?
It's certainly a possibility. I think that given how difficult the schedule is, and people are going to look at you by your win-loss record, fair or not, right? And you may be a better team, but if you come up short in a handful of games, say they lose to Tennessee and lose to Ole Miss this year, pick up a couple different wins elsewhere, but if they still finish at 7-5 in the regular season, are people even going to want to hear the remark from anyone, media, players, coaches? They're not going to want to hear people be like, oh yeah, we are a better team this year, we're improving. Well, if your record doesn't reflect it, that's that's going to ring empty. No one's going to want to hear that whatsoever. So for Florida, that absolutely is a realistic scenario they could find themselves in. I do think that there's a lot more confidence heading into the season for a couple of factors. You mentioned one of them. Florida probably is one of the few teams that can sit here and say, hey, I'm happy about how I finished down the stretch, because there's only one champion, right? But if you're a team that strings together a couple of ranked wins down the stretch, you show improvement from September to November, you have a lot of belief because you now have this quarterback coming back who, what are we going to get out of a full year of him? You bring back multiple key pieces as well who, based on the way you finished, want to see what they can do with a full healthy year. And, starting out with a better slate as well for Florida is a huge talking point within the building, because there were a lot of things that didn't go right at the beginning of the year last year. The players could acknowledge that, and the coaching staff could acknowledge that. I mean, they have to open against the number one offense last year in the Miami Hurricanes, and they got stomped, right? They lose by 24 at home. Texas A&M was better than I think a lot of people believe. Marcel Reed was a true freshman when he came into Gainesville, making his first start for the injured Connor Weigman. And, he was a quarterback that Florida wasn't really expecting to be as dynamic as he was. They ended up starting 1-2, lose their first two Power 4 games. Now you open the season against Long Island University, which, no offense to Long Island, I mean, that should be a game where you see Florida get that, aforementioned depth to get some action, where you have this massive lead in the second half and you can rest DJ and see what you have in the backups and let some, offensive linemen get a breather here before things get really, really difficult. And then you face a USF team, which I like what Alex Galesh is doing there in Tampa. But, this should be a game that Florida comes away with a double-digit win in the Swamp, in week 2. And then obviously it gets really difficult. But if you can get some momentum in the first couple of weeks and really have a chance to make some mistakes, put them on film, but not have them be detrimental to the point where you're talking about an unsavory outcome, then you really can feel good and be like, hey, we just won these 2 games by double digits. We obviously have to go into LSU, go to Baton Rouge, play a night game on September 13th, but we can get better, and we already have got these 2 wins under our belts. We're feeling really confident. It should be a better start for Florida. So if they can take the momentum from last year, ending on a high note, and bring that into the first 2 weeks of the season and then figure out the rest, then they have a chance to, where I'm going with this, is get a 1-win with improvement. And what I've said time and time again is that you have to, that's the bare minimum for Billy Napier returning, in my mind, in 2026. There's going to be a lot of people who are not content with another 7-5 finish. God forbid Florida goes 6-6. We're not talking, in my opinion, about Billy Napier in 2026. We're talking in November about a coaching change if Florida is on pace to go 6-6. So they got to, at least in my mind, go 8-4 in the regular season. And how you do that is going to be difficult, because obviously I mentioned the LSU game. You got to play a Miami team that you guys are obviously very familiar with, Carson Beck. Yeah, right. He's going to make some mistakes, but a guy who absolutely has put together, some 4,000-yard passing seasons, and he's stepping into an offense that was the number 1 offense in college football last year. And then you got to pay Texas A&M, Texas, obviously Georgia. Florida hasn't gotten over the hump there. I know you guys want that to continue, and the Dogs pick up their 5th win in a row, but Florida obviously knows that that is a statement potentially that Florida could make if they want to validate improvement, even if they come up short in some other games that they shouldn't lose. If they beat their arch rival in Georgia, there's going to be a lot of people who are sitting there and saying, finally, this is tangible progress. Let's build on this down the stretch. And then you have Tennessee late in the season. You do play Florida State there. So, I could make a joke and say a third cupcake game for the Gators, but you can't take FSU lightly, especially we don't know what Thomas Castellanos is going to do. I know he's talking a big game, but say he comes out, actually has one. That's not something that Florida wants to bank on being a given win whatsoever until they see the product on the field. So they're going to have to find a way to get 8 wins in the schedule. And, say they start with 2 wins right off the bat. Say they manage to go into LSU, an LSU team that I think a lot of people are still sleeping on. I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the nation. I know there's been a lot of chatter about Brian Kelly. Can he get over the hump? I think he gets over the hump this year with everything they're returning, who they got in the portal, Nussmeier coming back, that coaching staff. If you can manage to beat LSU, you can manage to beat Miami, and then you can win the rest of the games that are wins on your schedule that you should have a good chance of winning. Mississippi State, Kentucky, FSU, Tennessee has to come to Gainesville at the end of the season here, and we don't know what their quarterback situation is going to necessarily be like, how it's going to look. I would give Florida the favorite there in that game right now. And you remember in that Tennessee game last year, it went to overtime, and that was a game where Florida lost starting quarterback Graham Mertz to a torn ACL in that game. So you got to feel like you have a lot of confidence there, even though Josh Heupel does a fantastic job. So Florida's got to get to 8 wins. They can't be sitting here at 7-5 at the end of the year, or it's hard for me to see right now, at least, a path to Billy Napier coming back for a 5th year. So you have to keep building on what you've done. All the talk of the 4-game win streak at the end of the year and those first 2 wins, if Florida does get them, obviously, they're going to be all for naught if the Gators can't win the games that matter down the stretch.
Well, you really kind of teed me up there for where I was going to go. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but you kind of walked us right into it. And that is all the stuff Billy's saying sounds really great, but I was just unsure how they felt about him long term, right? How safe is he moving forward? And just how tied is he to Lagway, which you also mentioned earlier. I mean, the thing about DJ when you watch him play is it's very enticing. You can see the talent that's there. He is the kind of player that can elevate a program, in my estimation. So what does that mean? How much does that factor into the decision about Napier moving through 2025 if they are only getting to 7, maybe 8 wins, and say they don't beat Georgia, right? Is hang on with Lagway enough to get him that next year, or you just really don't think so?
I think it's a tough question because I think that there are so many people who their biggest question about Billy Napier is not recruiting, it's not evaluating, it's not developing, it's not who he is as a person, it's not about his care, it's not about any of those things. It's about him as a play caller. That has been the biggest talking point among Florida fans, and rightfully so, because the Gators have added talent. They've signed, top 15, top 10 classes, and they have Billy Napier being the play caller. And while there's going to be more responsibilities on the plate of Russ Callaway, who's the tight ends coach, and he's now the offensive coordinator, it still is Napier's show. And for the last couple of seasons, he has made the decision in the offseason that for a continuity perspective and from the coaching staff structure that he would remain the primary play caller. And for DJ Lagway, it makes a lot of sense for him to have the same voice in his ear for the 2nd straight year. That was the same argument that Billy Napier used for Graham Mertz when he came back for his 6th season. It absolutely is the case here right now, even though there's going to be more involvement from the offensive coaching staff with the play design. So that's the big question. I don't think there's any question that DJ Lagway has the potential to be special, right? I mean, he's a guy that if he's used correctly and you have put the pieces around him and you put him in a situation, he has all the tools to be one of the top quarterbacks in college football. That's at least the narrative, right? You've seen the arm strength. You've seen the explosive plays. We didn't even see too much of his dynamic athleticism last year because of the hernia. But you see his ability to turn plays that should be nothing into something. He's a touchdown waiting to happen at a moment's notice. And if the Gators don't capitalize on that, it's going to all fall on Billy Napier from a outside blame standpoint. Now, there's going to be people inside the building who are going to sit here and say, hey, listen, this is still a quarterback that has a lot to learn. DJ Lagway is still scratching the surface of how good he can be. I'm sure he's hoping that he's going to play this game for a long time, 2 more decades, right? But he still has a lot to work on. He didn't get a chance to work on that as much in spring camp due to his injury. And so you're riding a lot on a 19-year-old, about to be 20-year-old guy who is an imperfect product. And I think he'd be the first to acknowledge that. He has a lot of tools, but that's not going to be a valid excuse for a lot of people. If they don't get we saw of Lagway last year out for when he was in there for those 7 games, if we don't see that consistently, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to put the onus of that blame on Billy Napier. They're not going to make excuses and say, well, the guy didn't get spring camp. He's still an underclassman. They're going to turn it on Billy Napier because his seat has already been hot for, let's say, 2 years, right? I mean, his seat has been hot since his 2nd year at Florida when he had, and still does have, an under 500 record in the SEC. They lost several games due to mistakes, issues that they shouldn't have had. You know, if this was a first year, if this was an outlier, right? If this was a, you know, something that you had already not seen before, like if they had more success last year, then he's going to get a pass. But this is compounding, in a sense, the narrative from a lot of people that he stuck to his guns, stayed as the play caller. Florida's offense is not as explosive as it was. They weren't able to take advantage of all the weapons that they have, and the head coach then has to fall on the sword. Now, the flip side of that is, say that injuries strike and all the depth issues that we talked about. You know, the cornerback spot is certainly a question. Interior of the defensive line is a question. There's guys stepping up all over defense. Say Florida's defense regresses, but the offense is dynamic, the part that Billy Napier is responsible for. Then we have a very interesting situation here where I think a lot of people would be more even confident in Billy Napier as a play caller if the Gators are an explosive, dynamic offense. And then you start talking about the discussion of, hey, if you can come back next year, say if they only win 7 games this year, but there's so much promise with the offense, Florida's administration, their athletic department, would have to potentially weigh bringing back Napier for another season versus losing Napier and potentially losing DJ Lagway. DJ Lagway is a massive fan of Billy Napier, and if he has a fantastic season and you're talking about potentially losing him or bringing back Napier, you know, a lot of Florida fans are going to be between a rock and a hard place. Would you rather have an extra season of Lagway and Napier, or would you rather have 2026 without potentially either of them? That is going to be a very fascinating topic of conversation if the Gators are struggling in late October here, where people are starting to weigh what is the future going to look like in Gainesville. So that is what I think is absolutely going to be one of the fascinating hot, seat topics that we're going to get into, or potentially going to get into, depending on how the season goes for the Gators, is, are they willing to potentially let DJ Lagway walk if it means starting over at head coach, when there's no guarantees that you can, one, find a quarterback nearly as dynamic as Lagway, especially if your team is struggling and you're trying to go find them, on the recruiting trail, or spend more in the portal to bring someone in. And there's no guarantee that the next head coach you hire is going to be better than Billy Napier. The grass isn't always greener. So it's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. To answer the question, I know I'm long-winded and rambling, and I apologize for that, but I do think that there's a lot that is riding on DJ Lagway's shoulders, no pun intended, when it comes to Billy Napier's immediate future in Gainesville. If he's not successful, the blame is not going to fall on DJ Lagway. It's going to fall on Billy Napier.
Well, don't worry about being long-winded. I asked because I want to know, and I enjoy that point because it's very well made. Like on the surface level, I think I knew it, but to hear you say it out loud, and I ask how tied together are they, I wasn't even thinking about the fact if Napier leaves, then Lagway leaves. So I appreciate you bringing that to our attention, and that's the kind of thing that I like. I didn't think Billy was going to make it to the Florida Georgia game last year. Like that's how I was looking at it. And then they did what they did, right? They figured it out in the middle of the year and they took off. So I don't know that I'm sitting in any kind of position to make any judgments on how he's going to do. So I'll take your word for everything you just said there. And I am going to hold your feet to the fire a little bit though, because this is a tough schedule for Florida. There's no two ways around it. We just talked about everything there going on with the depth issues, young quarterback who still has to figure it out, questions about play calling. What is a fair expectation for the Florida Gators this year? And I understand things can happen anyway, right? But what is reasonable? I mean, and college football fans aren't usually reasonable, but I'm going to ask it that way anyway.
I think 8 wins is reasonable. I think that you look at the depth on Florida's roster. I know that Billy Napier came out today and said that they need to do a better job of establishing depth, but I think that at a lot of positions, this is the deepest that the Gators have been. Offensive line, wide receiver, I do think that
he did say it was the most talented roster. So he did go that far for sure.
I think that at the top of multiple positions, like Caleb Banks, Jake Slaughter, Austin Barber, Damian George, obviously Lagway, Eugene Wilson. I mean, they have some guys who would be starting on just about any team in the SEC. And I think that there are some questions of guys who are on the cusp who you haven't really seen how they're going to handle an in-game situation. Guys like Mekhi Barrow, seeing him play an elevated role. Some of the freshman cornerbacks that they've added to the roster, they're going to have to play this season at certain times. I do think that there are just a number of positions where it's kind of wait and see mode for Florida. So if the potential turns into, capable talent, then this is, in my opinion, the best roster that Florida has had in the Billy Napier era. And with the investments they've made for the coaching staff, obviously with Lagway, getting some key guys on defense back, having Cormani McClain in for a big year, getting their starting safeties back for the third straight year with Jordan Castell, having Miles Graham, Grayson Pup Howard was fantastic last year. The guys that they have, the top talent is really, really good. And it's the pieces around them stepping up to the level that is required. And if that happens, then I do think that 8, maybe 9 wins is attainable for Florida. I know it's kind of funny because the win projection, depending on who you look at, is 6, 6.5, 7 wins for Florida here. But, a lot of those games are going to be really, really close. And I do think that the Gators have the chance to win 8 games or more this season. I do think there's a good chance that they do it. But if they, lay a dud at LSU, and if they don't beat a Miami team that, I'm not going to sit here and discredit Carson Beck, but they picked him off 3 times last year, and I don't think Miami is as talented of a roster as Georgia's roster was last season, even though I do like the moves that the Canes were able to make in several spots of their team. I think their defense is a bit of a question this year. So if the Gators can beat Miami down in, Miami Gardens, potentially beat LSU, beat Tennessee, beat Florida State, Mississippi State, Kentucky, and then they win the first 2 games of the year. If they win those games right there, that we're talking 8 wins right there. So, and then you factor in an Ole Miss team that the Gators were able to get the better of last year, and now has a new quarterback in Austin Simmons, who I think is going to be fantastic. Former Florida commit, who I think is going to be really, really good. But they're moving from Jackson Dart, a guy who was as much of a sure thing as there was for Lane Kiffin's team. So even if Florida loses to Ole Miss, loses to Georgia, say they lose to LSU, I think 8 wins is still attainable for this team here. Texas A&M on the road is going to be tough. Texas at home is going to be tough for the Gators. But if they can find a way to win those games that are definitely winnable games, are going to be close contests, coin flip contests, then I think 8 wins is absolutely possible. And to go back to how we started this conversation, with their schedule, if the Gators are sitting here with the final 2 games of the season, and they're sitting here at, let's say, 8-2, and they got to play Tennessee at home and then play Florida State, 2 games that they have a really good chance of winning. If they're 8-2 heading into those games, there's going to be a lot of people talking about not Billy Napier being on the hot seat, but Florida potentially being a college football playoff team for the first time. So there's a chance, absolutely. It's part of the fascination is that this could be decide the Gators being a 6-win team and a 9-win team. And the narrative between those is vastly different, because 6 wins, you're talking about a potential coaching change, right? And 9 wins, you're talking about potentially making the college football playoff in the toughest conference in college football. And those games could come down to, like they have for every team, they can come down to 1 or 2 plays in each one of those games. And no one's going to look in at the end of the year and want to hear, well, we were 6 plays away from making the college football playoff. No, they're going to say you're a 6-win team.
Right.
So that's absolutely the fascinating thing for Florida. There's, a thin margin of error in my mind, and they have a chance to be a really, really good team. But if given the schedule, if injuries or things don't go according to plan, or mistakes, rear their ugly heads, this could easily be a team that is talking, 6 wins here. So that's what I think is fascinating. I think 8 or 9 wins is certainly possible for Florida, but a lot has to go right. They can't afford season-ending injuries. They've had injuries to their quarterback in each of the last 3 years. You're not going to overcome that too often here unless you got a guy like DJ Lagway waiting in the wings, and the Gators don't have another DJ Lagway on the roster. So it's going to be really fascinating to see. I can't wait for the season to get here, because we're finally going to be able to stop talking about it being on paper and see how the games get played for those 60 minutes.
Well, Graham, that's why we love college football, man. I mean, this thing could be boom or bust. They could make the playoff, or the whole thing could come unraveled, and they lose, Lagway and Napier before it's all over. So it's going to be interesting to see. Now, turn your vision north, and if you will, do me the favor of looking at my Georgia Bulldogs and let me know what you think is happening in Athens, because there are questions, maybe not concerns, but questions about the roster, not the roster, about holes needing to be filled on the first 22 there. So let me know what you think about how the Dogs look this year in the SEC and otherwise.
Yeah, I think the biggest question for me is Gunnar Stockton. I thought he was great in the Notre Dame game, especially given the circumstances that he had to deal with against that, Fighting Irish team. But I do think that there's some questions elsewhere. I think their backfield is great. I think they're going to have great wide receivers and tight ends. Once again, they seem to churn out future NFL, offensive linemen on a yearly basis. They got a factory up there in Athens where they just, plug these guys in and they come out looking like, 315-pound future offensive tackles who are going to play 10 years in the National Football League. I don't think that's a question for me. I think that the defense is probably the one question I have. You lose a guy like Malachi Starks, you lose a lot of talented pass rushers. How is that front seven going to look? I think that they have a lot of talent and a lot of guys who are blue chip prospects. And I'm not going to ever discredit a blue chip prospect, especially at a place like Georgia, because I know that they're going to be developed well and they're going to be coached well. But I do think that there are some questions just on defense. And I don't know what the depth looks like. You know a lot better than me. I look at the projected starters and I look at who they've added as recruits, but how those battles have shaken out in spring and now into fall camp here coming up, I don't know how those are going to play out here. I think KJ Bolden is a fantastic talent. I think that this is a team that has a chance to be really, really good, but I do think that there are probably more questions for this Georgia team than one I can remember in the last 3 to 4 years. I think Gunnar Stockton can be really, really good. And I think that this could be a situation where it's not going to all come down to the quarterback, how dynamic and impressive the quarterback is. I think that they're built from the other 21 starters to win, even if the quarterback play is, not to say it's subpar, but if it's not going to elevate your ceiling by 1 or 2 wins, I think they have enough to overcome it. So I do think that Georgia's going to be back in the college football playoff discussion this year. I'm just fascinated to see how some of those, needs that needed to be met in the offseason look this year. And I think it comes down to Stockton and the secondary right now. But I could be totally off base. I know you have a lot of listeners out there who know a lot more than me on the Georgia Bulldogs. And I'm just looking forward to that game in Jacksonville before we have to go to Atlanta and Tampa, because I like Jacksonville. Man, I like the game being played in Jacksonville. I know Georgia fans got to drive a little bit farther than Florida fans, but I like the game being in Jacksonville. Have you ever been out there and tailgated in the lot?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, my first game in
Unbeatable.
Jacksonville was 97, so that was the big upset with Donnan against Spurrier. So we kicked it off with a bang in my personal experience, and then I was there in in 03 when we just couldn't stop a bubble screen. You know what I mean? Like it's crazy down there. So I love making that trip.
I was there when Georgia goes down the field, scores first, and the whole team comes out into the end zone. And
Yep.
lo and behold, they win that game. That was a memory I'll never forget. It's awesome in Jacksonville, and it's always cool seeing the different sides of the field, seeing the red and black on one side and the orange and blue on the other. I love that. But in the tailgate parking lot, it's Florida and Georgia fans, sharing a drink together, and that's really what college football is all about. A little bit of a mini rant here, but I know that we always look at it through fan favorites and looking at it, rooting for your team. One of my favorite things about this job is that you meet so many recruits and players that it makes you appreciate. You kind of lose the fandom a little bit. I grew up in Gainesville. I went to UF, and I got this job right out of college, and I've lost my UF fandom in that sense because now I'm just a fan of people. And there are so many great people at, you're not going to believe this, at not just at Georgia, but at Alabama and Auburn and Florida and Miami and FSU. And you really just it makes it a lot more fun because you know that they could have come to your school and now they're facing off against you. And it's so cool. College football brings us together as much as it's about, the rivalries and the battles and the contests. Ultimately, college football brings people together. And that's what I think is so exciting about this time of year because you get to have these kind of, in a sense, and I'm not trivializing what we do, but these trivial conversations where so many people are looking at what's going on in the world, and you could get upset about so many things out there. If you could just direct your energy to how your football team is doing, I think that's such a healthier outlet. That's part of why I love doing this, because knowing that I'm giving people something to read about that isn't going to stress them out or upset them or make them fear for how the world is going. They can just focus on, do they have good quarterback play? What's the interior of the defensive line looking like? It's so trivial in a sense compared to everything else out there. And that's what makes it so fun, is that people are passionate about something that ultimately is not going to change your life one way or the other for the good or the bad. Now, obviously, if your team wins the national championship, it's going to change your life for the better, of course. But you know what I'm saying? This is absolutely just an exciting time of year, because we can have these passionate talks about something that, we're going to find out about in a week, how it all goes down. And I love that part of it.
Oh, I'm with you, Graham. And I really appreciate you taking a second and saying that, because I feel the same way. I've been doing it for, more than a quarter century. So I'm right there in the boat with you. And I do really love doing shows like this, where I get to reach out and have conversations with guys that maybe I didn't know before, but hopefully we're going to continue these talks into the future. Graham, thank you so much for making me smarter about those hated Gators, man. I'm a Bulldog through and through, just like you, Georgia alum. So, but we can still keep it fair and professional and talk about it straight. So there you go. Seriously though, thank you so much for coming on and spending time with us. I feel good about what we did tonight, and I'm really, really looking forward to that game in Jacksonville.
Absolutely. We'll have to do it again. Hopefully closer to the game here. We can talk it up afterwards or beforehand, make some predictions, whatever you want. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. I'll be in touch, man. Take care of yourself. Okay.
You too.
All right, everybody. There you go. That was Graham telling us all about the Florida Gators down there in Jacksonville and getting us ready for what's going to happen when we get together a little bit later this season, breaking down what happened in Atlanta and everything else. But we got to keep the train moving, because we're not done. We still have to talk about the Oklahoma Sooners, the team that I actually thought Georgia might play before they wound up playing the Texas Longhorns, but it didn't shake out that way. Today, Brent Venables and his Sooners rolled into Atlanta and had a lot to say about a lot of things. When you hear what Brent had to say, we talked about his quarterback. We talked about the fact they have a new OC. We talked about all the things they're doing to try to make sure that they are ready. They were acclimating still to life in the SEC. But he, like I said, he was there with some of his top players. He had Venables, he had John Mateer there with him, his new quarterback, and they were letting us know how everything's going to go. There's a lot shaking in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is another one of those teams that people are pointing to as a potential surprise team in the SEC this year. So why not talk to somebody who can actually tell us whether or not that's a fair expectation for the Sooners? That would be Jesse Crittenden of the OU Insider. Jesse, thank you so much for taking time to come on here and chat with us. I appreciate you hanging out there as we finished up with our Florida guest. What happened in Atlanta today that we need to walk away from regarding the Oklahoma Sooners? What did Brent Venables tell us?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first, we got a 17-minute opening statement from Brent Venables. So there were some jokes about, is he going to go the longest of any coach for opening statements? If you pay attention to Brent Venables at all, you know how long-winded he is. I think he's going to take the prize for the longest opening statement. But part of that, I think, was reflecting in just how much change Oklahoma has undergone the last few months. I mean, I think from a roster standpoint, from an overall program standpoint, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a program that has undergone more change than them. And I think you got that kind of reflected today. And that's why, you've got John Mateer as one of the three players that comes today, because his addition not only is a significant change for this program, there's a lot on his shoulders to course correct and lead the offense in a different direction after this offense was one of the worst in the entire country, not just the SEC a season ago. So I think more than anything, I think you got some confidence, especially from a defensive perspective. This was still one of the best defenses in the country, or at least in the SEC last season. So I think you had these players, you had Brent Venables express some confidence that they can build on that. And I think there's some confidence that the offense will be better. But I think everybody understands just how much pressure is on this season. I mean, you can't go 6-7 in two seasons out of 3 in Norman and not there not be pressure. So I think Brent Venables understands the pressure. I think these players understand the pressure. But I think there's a confidence not only in the changes they've made, but now that they've got a year in the SEC, under their belt, that there's more confidence in knowing how to navigate these waters going into year 2.
Okay, so let's drill down just a little bit here, because John Mateer is a name that we don't necessarily know here in the SEC. He's coming from the Pac-12 out there at Washington State, and his offensive coordinator's coming with him. What is that going to look like for Oklahoma? It has to be a good thing to think that they're familiar and that he knows what he's going to be doing from day one as he steps into Norman.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I even asked R. Mason Thomas, the defensive end, about that, about their connection specifically today. And he said, Arbuckle and Mateer, it's almost like they have telepathy, like they're thinking the same thing at the same time. And I think that's important because when you're implementing not only a completely new offense, but again, when you're coming off of a season when you were as poor offensively as OU is, I think when it's not just your offensive coordinator teaching the system, it's that you have your quarterback also teaching that system, and that your OC and your quarterback have experience playing together and also had success together last season. Like, yeah, it's Washington State. Obviously, it's not Oklahoma. It's not in the SEC. But Washington State, by every metric, was one of the most explosive offenses in the country. And John Mateer was one of the most explosive players in the entire country last season. It wasn't just his passing ability. He was top 10 in yards per completion. He finished with over 1,000 rushing yards. He was their entire offense. But I think additionally, just his dual threat ability, his ability to run RPOs, it's his ability to threaten defenses down the field. It's his ability to take off and run when he's facing some pressure. So I think when you have just an explosive guy like John Mateer, and then obviously you pair him with his offensive coordinator, I think there's a lot of optimism there. But I think the other thing is, everything that John Mateer brings is huge, considering some of the question marks Oklahoma has, both on the offensive line and at wide receiver. It's basically a brand new receiver core. And this offensive line, they brought in some new pieces, but this is an offensive line group that finished second to last in tackles for loss allowed last season in the entire country. They finished dead last in sacks allowed. So even if the offensive line is better, I think you're going to need your quarterback to be able to kind of make something out of nothing and be an explosive element that this team just didn't have last year. So I think for all of those reasons and just that natural cohesion, I think there's a lot more excitement and a lot more optimism about what this offense can be.
Well, it certainly sounds like he's a true dual threat, and that obviously is a good thing if you got to try to give yourself every advantage possible there. You talk about, well, I made mention of Venables seemed to be saying that they're still sort of getting SEC ready. And what I mean by that is he mentioned the offensive line, the defensive line, bodies and positions. I wasn't clear if he was talking about depth or if he was just talking about development, because I remember he was talking about this one young man, if I have this right, who came in as a pass rusher. He was like 210, 12 pounds. Now he's up to 250, one of the best in the league. Finished with 9 sacks last year, potential All-American. He was All-SEC last year. So is it more about having the right kind of players to survive life in the SEC, or is it more about we just didn't have good luck and we had injuries here and things didn't go right and it went downhill from there?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think Brent has talked a lot about how in the SEC, obviously the battle is won on the trenches, and so I think there was a layer of physicality and just overall experience that the team wasn't ready for, and injuries on the offensive line also played a part in that, and also I think exposed their lack of depth in several places. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think, as you mentioned, R. Mason Thomas is the defensive end, the guy that was one of the lone. Yeah, he was one of the lone bright spots last season and went from a guy that was really injury plagued the first 2 years, and then year 3 took a huge step, not only in terms of production, but also I think in his weight, in his size. And I think that's been a really big point of emphasis this past season, or this past offseason, is guys, I think, just now understanding what it takes to be successful in the SEC. And as much as X's and O's are important, and as much as scheme is important, it really is sometimes just as simple as who's winning the battle up front. And I think this team has a better understanding of what that takes. And so I think as much as, yeah, it's great that the offense has, you have a new C, you have a new quarterback, like those things are great. But at some point, it's just going to be about, can your offensive line make things happen up front? Can your defensive line generate pressure on the quarterback? Can they get into running lanes? Can do those types of things. So I think it's mostly a little bit of both, but I do think more than anything, as much as there's been an emphasis on trying to retool the roster, I think it's just about understanding, oh, this is what it takes to be in the SEC. Hey, we got our asses kicked by LSU. We got our asses kicked by South Carolina. We got our asses kicked by Missouri, just by teams being more physical than us. And I think they're, if nothing else, wanting to go into next season or this coming season, not getting their asses kicked, for a better way to put it.
Well, that's what got my attention. He was like, I just want to make sure we're talking about the work that they've done because they're faster, they're bigger, right? And that's why I wanted a little perspective on it. Um, is it fair to say that they're hoping that the defense will be better this year than it was last year? And is that because of people being fully healthy? Or am I missing something there? Because I think back to last year's group and I thought, well, they were pretty salty. You know, they had Stutzman and they were pretty good. Did I just miss that one? Or is that the hope that they're going to be better this year?
No, I think there has been some questions about whether the defense can maintain what they did last season or whether they might take a step back. And part of that is
Okay.
because you're losing Danny Stutzman in the middle of your defense. You're losing Billy Bowman. I mean, those were two guys that were 3-year starters, both all SEC guys that were just huge leaders for this team. And I think also were pivotal in transitioning from Lincoln Riley to Brent Venables. So I think they were helpful in that way too. So I think from a national perspective, I think there's certainly been a question about whether the defense can maintain what they did last season. I think internally, I think there's excitement that they could take a step forward. I don't know if that's the expectation because when you lose a couple guys like that, it's tough. But look, this defensive line, I think, is just going to be better. They retained basically everybody. They lost one of their defensive end starters, but in Ethan Downs, but they're replacing him with Marvin Jones Jr., a guy that has SEC experience. He played at Florida State last year. They're bringing back R. Mason Thomas, who finished with 12 and a half tackles for loss, 9 sacks. Their interior was really solid last season, and they're bringing back basically every contributor from last season. And I think they're really excited about some of the young guys, pretty much at every position. I mean, even their one of their starting cornerbacks basically missed all of last season, but he's healthy and expected to be available for fall camp and the season starting. If he is healthy, I think that shores up maybe the only question about the secondary. So I think you could look at, there might be a little bit of concern about depth or inexperience at linebacker. And again, that cornerback in Ginger Williams, is he going to be healthy? But I think if everything goes right, if they stay healthy and they just get a young guy or two to pop, I think they can be not only as good, but maybe even a little better next season. And I think the excitement there is if that happens and your offense can take a step forward, then you can finally kind of get both pieces of the puzzle working together. Because a lot of times last season, the defense was the only thing that was working.
Yeah, well, change seems to be the theme of the day. I mean, obviously, we had Mississippi State there. They're turning over their roster. My other guests have talked about how things are changing in their world. And obviously, at Norman, there's going to be some change with the new OC, the new quarterback, so on. What, in all of this change, beyond Mateer, who are some of the names that maybe we ought to look at for Oklahoma and say that guy is one of the reasons they're doing better this year?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of guys on both sides of the ball. On offense, they added Jaden Ott out of California at running back, and he's a guy that I think got lost a little bit in the fold last season because he was hurt for most of the year, and when he did play, he wasn't 100%. But this was a guy that 2 seasons ago ran for over 1,000 yards on nearly 6 yards per carry, and now you're bringing him into the fold. And again, just like how I think they're hoping that John Mateer presents not only an explosiveness, but a guy that can kind of create something out of nothing. I think they're excited about Jaden Ott's potential to do that and also just be a number one running back. There was kind of a log jam at running back before they added Ott after spring practices ended. But now he comes in as the clear number one guy, the guy that can handle 20 touches a game, maybe even be impactful in the passing game. I think he caught 46 passes as a freshman. So I think if everything goes right and OU's offense is good next season or this coming season, I think he's going to be a big part of that. Deion Burks at receiver. is a guy that they got him out of Purdue last season, but missed 7 games because of injury. He's a guy that even despite missing 7 games, finished second on the team in receptions and led the entire team in touchdowns.
Wow.
So I think that has to do with both how good he was when he played and also how bad and injured the rest of the receivers were. But he comes back, I think, now fully healthy. And then I think defensively, Eli Bowen at cornerback. Coming into his second season, he was a true freshman that wasn't in the rotation at all to start the year. But by the Texas game, he was maybe the most important part of this defense. The advanced metrics loved him. All the Pro Football Focus stats loved him. He had one of the best coverage grades in the entire SEC. And he's a guy that kind of came out of nowhere, going from not playing at all to averaging almost 60 snaps a game. So again, I think if OU's defense is either going to maintain or take a step forward, it's going to be because someone like Eli Bowen not only kind of proved that last season wasn't a fluke, that he is that good, but if he takes another step forward, is going to be huge. But I honestly think this coming season, I think for OU, the theme is a lot of things could go right. And if they go right, it's going to be because a lot of guys on both sides of the ball took a huge step forward, because they're going to be relying on some guys that haven't had a ton of production. But if everything goes wrong, it's probably because, hey, these couple of guys that they needed to take a step forward didn't take a step forward, and maybe some of those injury concerns from a year ago. Maybe OU, I think OU is hoping for the positive end of injury luck, but maybe the injury bug snake bites them again, and maybe we're looking at another disastrous season.
Well, it's like I was just saying with our Florida guest, could be boom or bust. It sounds like the pressure is high in Norman. Given everything you just said there, what is realistic? What is fair to ask of this Oklahoma team heading into 2025?
It's the ultimate question, because there's a couple of different ways to look at it. I think on paper, on both sides of the ball, especially defensively, there's a lot of talent here. And then even offensively, I mean, there are some question marks, but a lot of the biggest question marks they addressed in the offseason. And if John Mateer proves he can be a top 5 SEC quarterback and the defense maintains or maybe even takes a step forward, I don't think there's any reason why this team can't compete atop the SEC standings. Now, I think even if everything goes well, I don't know if they're like competing for an SEC title. But I mean, I think they can win 9 games. I think they could maybe even push for 10 games if everything goes really well. But the flip side of that is, even if things go well, they play. I mean, this schedule is just a murderer's row. For anybody that hasn't looked at it, I mean, it's going to end up one of the top 5 hardest schedules in the country. I mean, they go to Bama, they go to Tennessee, they go to South Carolina, they play LSU, they play Texas. Actually, I mean, I think OU fans have been pretty frustrated with the schedules they've been given to start off, especially when they compare to Texas. The only thing about Texas is they have to play Georgia. I think OU fans are glad they don't have to play Georgia, but otherwise, I think OU would gladly switch schedules with Texas. So I think that's the other part of it, is even if everything goes well, maybe that still ends up in 7 wins, because this schedule is crazy. And we've seen how competitive and how close a lot of these SEC games are. Even if they're taking a step forward, what if they lose by 1 score at Bama, and all it takes is a 3-point loss here, a 3-point loss here, and all of a sudden you're looking at 8 wins, 7 wins. So I think on paper, I think the easiest way to answer it is, I think on paper, if everything goes well, I don't know why this team can't win 9 games and maybe flirt with a college football playoff discussion. But even if everything goes well, it's not a guarantee they're going to get to 9 wins. And then at that point, it's if they have another bad injury or 2 here, just like they did last season, then again, couple that with this schedule, that could turn into 6, 7 wins really, really quickly.
Yeah, it starts to unravel at that point. So what is fair in terms of Brent Venables and his status there at Oklahoma? Or are they still bought in and allowing him to work through the transition into the league and the things he's having to overcome? Or is the rope getting pretty tight?
I mean, I think for the most part, top to bottom from the administration, there is still a fundamental belief that Brent Venables can be that guy. Because I think even when you look at how disappointing his tenure has been so far, I mean, you have 2 6-win seasons. in his first 3 years. It's unacceptable at Oklahoma. And I think there's a lot of things that he's got to get better at. I think it's clear there's some things he's got to learn. I think in-game management is a particular issue. Fans have really criticized him for some issues he's had managing games, whether it's a bad timeout here, or not realizing that's here, a bad substitution here. At the same time, we can't really know how last season would have went because the injuries are so bad. I think people from maybe outside of Oklahoma don't realize just how bad the injuries were. I mean, their top 5 receivers, each one of them, all missed most or the entire season. I mean, their offensive line, they had 4 different starting tackles. They had 4 different guys log meaningful snaps at center. So it's like, again, it's one of those things that how much can you blame Brent that the entire offensive side of the ball basically died, especially in the wide receiver room. At the same point, though, and I think you see that belief in him because they went out and did so many things this offseason. It wasn't just going to get John Mateer, the guy wanted at quarterback. It wasn't just going to get Ben Arbuckle at offensive coordinator, the guy Brent Venables wanted. I mean, they have hired a general manager in Jim Nagy. Right. Jim Nagy has assembled a team full of NFL guys with experience to take some of the load off of him. So that almost ends up working in 2 different ways. It's like, we're investing all these resources in you, and we're investing all these resources in this program because we believe in you. But this isn't year 1. This isn't year 2. This is year 4. And if Oklahoma gets to the end of this season and they're looking at another 7-win season or another 6-win season, I mean, unless the circumstances are just way beyond his control, I think it's going to be hard to imagine bringing Brent Venables back next season if this season goes sideways again. Not to mention OU's athletic director, their longtime athletic director, Joe Castiglione, just announced he's going to be retiring here in the next few months. He's the guy that hired Brent Venables. So if a new athletic director comes in sometime this winter at the end of this season after another bad season, they're going to have less attachment to Brent Venables and this staff than maybe Joe Castiglione would. So I think the thing here is they have done a lot to invest in him. I think there is still a lot of belief in him, but it's kind of with the caveat of, hey, we've done all this stuff. Now we just got to go win football games. And if we don't win football games for whatever reason it is, there's going to be pressure to change things and have a fresh start.
And that's a beautiful explanation of the situation there. A tale as old as time, right? The AD, if there's a new one or when there's a new one, he's going to want his own guy, so on and so forth. Just to put a button on it, how much is the Texas-Oklahoma thing a problem for Venables, right? Texas is succeeding. They're in the CFP, so on. And now you have Oklahoma, who is not there right now or hasn't been. Is that an addition to that? Does that just make it worse? I assume it does.
It certainly doesn't help. I think is probably the nicest way to say it. Yeah, because I think there's 2 different ways to look at this. One, everything you just said. Texas with Steve Sarkisian has flat out outclassed Oklahoma and Brent Venables. With both of those guys leading these programs, and I think when you look at the success that Texas has had, not only having getting to the playoff, but I think where you can see they're building on success, and now they're creating this model of consistency that, I mean, we're going into this season again, and it's Texas and Georgia atop, the favorites to win the SEC, right? So I think it's not only the success they've had, but what they're building. But on top of that, Oklahoma has been thoroughly outclassed on the field against Texas since Brent Venables started. I mean, they lost 49-0 in Brent's first year. Now, obviously, injuries were a huge part of that. Dylan Gabriel was out at quarterback. They were trying to run the Wildcat with their tight end and the running back taking snaps. I mean, it was a mess. But you get beat 49-0 in year 1. Last season, you get beat 34-3 in games that were over at the end of the first quarter. So I think it's both of those things. And yeah, I think going into this season, I think it would take a lot for there to be a midseason change. And again, I think, all of the undercurrent of all of this is, I think there's a lot of legitimate reasons to be optimistic that this season can be different and successful for Oklahoma. At the same point, they play Michigan week 2. They play Auburn, and Jackson Arnold comes back to town in week 4. If either of those games go rough, and then you go into Texas week 6, and if that game is again not competitive, I think things start to fall apart very quickly. And I honestly think beating Texas is probably the most important thing for Oklahoma this season. But actually, more than anything, it just needs to be competitive, because 2 of the last 3 years, these games just simply haven't been competitive. So, and then I think you factor that in with the fact that Oklahoma and Texas are always going to be compared. They were always compared in the Big 12 when Oklahoma dominated the conference for the most part. But now you come to the SEC, the spotlight's on both of these programs coming into the SEC at the same time, and Texas, for the most part, is hitting it out of the park. Meanwhile, Oklahoma goes 6-7 in their first season. So yeah, I think it certainly hasn't helped, and I think it puts a lot of pressure on Oklahoma to kind of even the playing field a little bit against Texas this year.
Well, there you go. I figured it was something like that. I can't imagine a midseason change, but like you just laid out, I can see how we would get there. If you will, let's pull out of Norman for a second. Look back across the conference here. Georgia has questions across the roster. There maybe at a national level, people don't know them like we Dog fans know them, and there are a lot of things that they aren't sure about. But as you apply your lens from inside the conference, but not right next door, what do you think about Georgia as we move into 2025?
Yeah, I think Georgia, more than anything, it's kind of like Texas, but they've done it to a much larger extent, building this consistency of success that is really hard to do in the SEC. Having said that, it is interesting to come into a season where, from my perspective, maybe there are more question marks. Maybe that's even a strong word, but more question marks than normal about this Georgia team. I mean, I think they were ranked 108th by ESPN in returning production in the country. So that's outside the norm for them. And then you go into a season with a new quarterback in Gunnar Stockton that I think there's certainly there seems to be a lot of excitement about him. There's a lot of potential about him. I know he was good in the bowl game, but you just never know in a conference like this when you're playing a guy that hasn't played a ton or that doesn't have a ton of experience on the field. And we know, like the line of scrimmage is important. You need talent around him, but so much revolves around the quarterback. Then I think you look at the defense and I mean, Georgia is always going to have talent. I think that's going to be the number one separator. I mean, they just had another incredible recruiting class. So I think, they're always going to have talent where I think other teams don't have that thing to fall back on. But I think it is going to be interesting, again, from an outsider perspective, to see this Georgia team where maybe there's more position battles than normal, or particularly on the defensive end where you have some guys that maybe don't have a ton of proven production that you kind of need to take a step forward. Having said all of that, when you look at this roster and just the talent they have and this new freshman class they have bringing in, I think even with some of those question marks and with even some of the lack of returning production, this is probably still neck and neck with Texas, the most talented team in the country. And I've got to vote for all SEC or preseason all SEC stuff. I'm going to do that later tonight. It's going to be difficult for me to choose between Texas and Georgia in terms of who I think is going to finish number one in the conference. I would probably lean Texas, but I think Georgia, unless things just go so poorly, unless Gunnar Stockton just struggles at quarterback, I'd be really shocked if they're not back in the college football playoff discussion. To me, that seems pretty safe, just how much talent they have. And I will also say, just as a note, it's been really interesting here at SEC Media Days to see Kirby Smart just clearly be kind of the leader in the room. Not only just the amount of experience he has, the success he's had, but so many of these other programs in the SEC have guys that don't have a ton of experience. They haven't been with these programs for very long. What Georgia has done is impressive, and I think for me, it's just going to be interesting to see the couple of question marks they do have. How do they navigate those things as they go into the season?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you point out the returning production for Georgia, because Texas was like 106. They're right there neck and neck with Georgia. And that's where you fall back on the recruiting, the roster, and all that sort of stuff. And we just have to go let them do it on the field, and then we'll know for sure. Jesse, thank you so much for coming in and giving us some of your time and educating us on our brothers in the SEC to the West, letting us know what's going on in Oklahoma. I know I learned a lot about the Venables situation that I don't think I knew coming into it. I appreciate the time. If there's ever anything I can do for you, man, you just let me know.
I appreciate it, man. I'm hoping Oklahoma and Georgia link up soon. It's a shame that it's the first 2 seasons they don't play for Oklahoma in the SEC. It's tough, but I'm hoping they link up soon. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I hope you have a great evening, man.
You too, man.
Take care. So there you have it, friends. We've bounced all around the SEC. We've talked about all 4 of the teams that joined us today in Atlanta: Alabama, Mississippi State, Florida, and Oklahoma. We are now through 3 days of SEC Media Days. One more day to go. We'll finish up strong tomorrow night, just like we have all week. I hope you've enjoyed our coverage of SEC Media Days this week. I appreciate you guys for sitting in here with us tonight. I think I saw a super chat or two from Casey. Thank you so very much for doing that and supporting our efforts here. We show up. We're trying to help everybody be a smarter fan here in the SEC, because that is what the game is about. It's like Graham from Florida said, we're bringing people together. It's good to get a perspective that's not Georgia-based, Athens-based from time to time, and see how people view our dogs around the rest of the conference. So I appreciate all of you for sitting in here with us tonight. Y'all take care of yourselves. Take care of your friends, your families. Take care of each other, and I'll see you again tomorrow night. Go Dogs!